need a love reaction. Come on baby, give me just one look. You can't start a fire, you can't start a fire without a spark. This comes through higher, even if we're just dancing in the dark.
You shouted loud, but I can't hear a word you say. I'm talking loud, not saying much. I'm criticized, but all your bullets they can't see. You shoot me down, but I get up. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Fire away, fire away. Ricochet, take your aim. Fire away, fire away. You shoot me down, but I won't roll. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't roll. I am titanium. You cut me down, but it's you who have further to fall. Ghost town, haunted love. Raise your voice. Sticks and stones may break my bones. I'm talking loud, not saying much. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Fire away, fire away. Ricochet, take your aim. Fire away, fire away. You shoot me down, but I won't roll. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't roll. I am titanium. Stone hard machine gun, firing at the ones who run. Stone hard like bulletproof glass. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Fire away, fire away. Ricochet, take your aim. Fire away, fire away. You shoot me down.
ask you to stand, please, ladies and gentlemen.
I came to dance, 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 dance.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our celebration of the life of Shane Culley. My name is Kevin Foote, and I would like to thank you all for coming here today on behalf of his lovely wife Les and their families, and for showing them how much Shane meant to you all. On a personal note, I class myself as a friend of Shane's and deem it a real honour to be here today amongst so many of his family and friends, to be able to pay our respects in the manner with which he wanted us to do so. Following the ceremony, Shane's family will be retiring to Springwood Crematorium to say their final goodbyes to him, where most of you will be left here, but they will be returning to join you as we have some refreshments and carry on our stories and reflections and our memories of such a wonderful chap. There is also going to be a place at the back of the room where an opportunity for make any donations, in keeping with what Shane did throughout most of his life, working tirelessly for some of the charities that he long supported. The ones we will be supporting today are the Marie Curie Trust and the Brain Tumour Charity. There are some places at the back to place any donations there, alongside which there will also be a memory book for anybody to leave any memories. And I'm told any memories. Don't worry about them if you think they're a bit risque or a bit worry. Please feel free to leave them. Okay. By being here today, you've not only shown the family how much you care, but that in your company they are free and safe to grieve. In fact, all of us here today are free to cry, to laugh, to share our stories, sit in quiet contemplation, simply be there for each other. And during this ceremony, there will be plenty of opportunity, trust me, to do all of that and more. I would like to begin by inviting Les and Shane's good friend, Mo Rushton. She's going to come up and read the poem Remember Me as her tribute to Shane.
I feel very privileged to be asked to read this poem for Shane, a remarkable man and an amazing friend. Remember me. To the living, I am gone. To the sorrowful, I will never return. To the angry, I was cheated. But to the happy, I am at peace. And to the faithful, I have never left. I cannot speak, but I can listen. I cannot be seen, but I can be heard. So, as you stand upon the shore, gazing at the beautiful sea, remember me. As you look in awe at a mighty forest in its grand majesty, remember me. Remember me in your hearts, in your thoughts, and in the memories of times we loved, times we cried, the battle we fought, and the times we laughed. For if you always think of me, I will never have gone.
Cheers, Mum. Whilst we reflect on those lovely words, we're going to have another piece of music.
I can see clearly now the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, 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 sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. I think I can make it now. The pain is gone. All of the bad feelings have disappeared. Here is that rainbow I've been praying for. It's gonna be a bright, 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 sunshiny day. Look all around, there's nothing but blue sky. Look straight ahead, nothing but blue sky. I can see clearly now the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. It's gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. Gonna be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. Oh, what a bright, bright, sunshiny day.
Those of you who are fans of Western music or Western films may have recognised the music we came into, as it was none other than the theme tune to the film Shane. Now, unfortunately, Shane's mum is unable to be with us this afternoon due to a recent surgery, for which we wish her a speedy recovery. However, had Rosemary been with us, she would have told us that Shane was given his name as she was rather fond of the actor Alan Ladd, who took the starring role. We begin recounting Shane's life this afternoon by listening to a poem narrated especially for us by a gentleman called Chris Whitfield, a retired farmer and president of the East Yorkshire Dialect Society, and coincidentally, Shane's Sunday school teacher. Unable to be here himself, he is very proud to be asked to play a part in today's celebrations. And just before we play it, just have a think. That's how Shane used to speak.
Lahtle Wetwang by George Hardwick. At name of Wetwang, people starts and thinks I comes fra foreign parts. But we're all British right enough. A bit of real good Yorkshire stuff. It's folks that lives at Wetwang. At village there's not much to see, but aye, by gum, it's dear to me, for I were bred and born out there, and that's the reason that I care for bonny Lahtle Wetwang. I laid it cradle, snug and warm, my parents kept me free from harm. Hard-working folks they were, and poor, and yet they kept the wolf at door when it sniffed round at Wetwang. And then they sent me off to school for fear of turning out a feel. I thought at Gaffer were odd Nick at times when he gave me the stick for robbing nests at Wetwang. And then I learnt to follow plough, to scruffle turnips, milk tart cow. And then I nearly robbed me shet, me master shavs of corn to get, to staggeth down I Wetwang.
To those of you who met him later in life, I'm sure you never heard him speak like that. Excuse me. So, the following stories that I'm going to recount were actually given to me by the man himself. Now, he was born on the 20th of January 1960 in a little place deep in the east wolds of Yorkshire, between York and Bridlington. All known well because he took great pride in getting as much of a laugh as mentioning it as often as he could. And as we heard from that chap, he dropped the G. Shane never did when he come from Wetwang. He was the only child of Mum Rosemary and Dad Ken, and is remained by his lovely sister, Kerry. In hearing the wonderful words of Chris, sharing the poem Lahtle Wetwang with us, we get a bit of an insight into the accent that Shane spoke with as a young child. Now, when he was 8, his parents broke up and he went on to attend the Royal Alexander and Albert Private School, or Gatton, as it's known down in Reigate, where he boarded from the age of 8. He told me it was a very daunting experience, but one he did eventually get to look upon fondly. The timetable went something like this. Chores at 6:30, 7:30, breakfast, where the lowers, he was classed as one of them, were expected to serve the uppers before they themselves got to eat. Then it was off to hymn bash, as he called it, which was where his love of music started, and he became well known for his excellent voice. During the school's Sunday services, for instance, they were joined by the locals, something Shane thoroughly enjoyed. He was joined at the school by his cousins Dawn and Joanne, and if it wasn't for Dawn, he probably would never have eaten. By the time the uppers had finished their stint, there wasn't much left, apart from toast and marmalade. Now, Dawn was well liked by the uppers, especially the boys, who would often try to impress her with gifts, such as sausages, which she would then send down to Shane. And this was where he developed his penchant for sausage and marmalade on toast. Lessons were between 9 and 3:30, with an hour for lunch, with tea time following, and then bed at 8. Saturday was classed as a school day when they had double English or maths, but which was followed by an afternoon of sport. Apart from football, and I'm all sure you've seen the photo of him stood in the pitch in the cold, dithering with his chums, and that's at the back end if anyone hasn't seen it. He excelled, actually, at basketball. He was, in fact, the school team captain for many years and travelled all over the country playing with other school teams, places including at Crystal Palace. Now, despite some of his setbacks he faced at school, being the team's captain gave him valuable life experience. He was always one for looking out for those he considered less fortunate than himself. And this was obviously something he continued to do throughout his life, and especially in his policing career. He always considered himself a fair and honest copper, and many of those he came across in his life thanked him for the help and support he gave them. It was this desire to help others and seek out justice and fairness that no doubt led him to take up the role he did with Operation Resolve, the Hillsborough inquiry. Now, whilst at school, he also discovered that he was excellent at darts. When he and some of his schoolmates would pop into the local for a game, and no doubt a cheeky pint. Now, obviously, they weren't meant to be there, but he was that good that they asked him if he could stand in as a ringer, as one of their players had turned out. Unfortunately for him, that was when he was found out, because their opposing team were the school staff. Now, this wasn't the only time Shane broke out. As aged about 14, he and a couple of friends decided they were going to watch their favourite team, Man United, play up at home in Old Trafford. Now, they must have watched the likes of The Great Escape as they got out by tying blankets together, shimmying down them and making their way across the grounds. They made their way down to London and from there to Stoke on no more than a platform ticket. It was here that their escapade could have ended, as they were apprehended by the British Transport Police, easily picked out by the fact they were still in their school uniform. Now, when they contacted the school to find out what they wanted to do with them, they said, well, they got them that far, let them make their own way back. Now, for whatever reason, their guile, their ingenuity, the police took pity on the boys and paid for them to actually get up the rest of the way to Manchester, where they then went and bunked in to see the game. Now, when they eventually made their way back to school, they were all confined to their desks as punishment. It had been well worth it too, having since learned from one of his colleagues in Operation Resolve that it was a 5-1 win for United over Spurs in front of a crowd of 51,641, Shane obviously being the one. An interesting addendum to this story was shared with me by Shane's uncle Andrew, who, being roughly the same age as him, became more like his brother. It was almost 20 years after the incident, and Andrew was down in Australia working for the South Australian Correctional Services. Whilst there, the staff kept telling him about Mick. Oh, you'll love Mick. He's full of the stories you'll love to hear. His name was Mick Griffiths. And as well as working for the Correctional Service, he was also president of the South Australian Man United Supporters Club. He eventually came back off long-term sick, and indeed was full of the stories Andrew did love to hear, especially of his time at Gatton Park. When Andrew heard this, he asked if he knew a certain Shane Culley. He did. And then he asked, did you ever escape to see Man United? He did, and owned up to being one of the co-conspirators on that glorious day. Another sign of how small a world it is. On a personal note, Andrew remembered the fun times he had with Shane when they were growing up, such as the time he and Shane were on top of Valley Forge, a very steep hill by all accounts. They were just up to the usual things boys get up to, and when Andrew saw him disappear down the hill, he wondered what it was. He started rolling head over heels all the way down to the bottom, being stopped only by the last tree, which just happened to be the last thing to stop him before he rolled into the road. Now, his sister Kerry's memories of their childhood included when they were younger and used to be a part of the Forces Caravan Club out in Germany, travelling all over. One particular trip was to the Chemise Lake in Bavaria, close to Munich, and they had snail posts they had made and painted. She and Shane often went out to the lake in dinghies, from which she frequently saw eels. And being only 8 or 9 years old, she wanted one. Now, walking along the water's edge one day, she saw one and decided to venture down to the bank to claim her prize. It was a shale bank, and as soon as she stepped onto it, ended up sliding all the way down into the water. Seeing this, Shane ran straight over and slid down to grab her, trying not to knock more stones on top of her in the process. All she was bothered about was getting this eel, and couldn't see what all the fuss was about. Family and friends came running over and made a human chain down the bank, and eventually pulled her to safety, but still wanting this eel. Later on, after Mother had calmed her nerves, Shane took her out fishing and to try and catch something, albeit nearly capsizing the rowing boat they were actually in. Camping holidays with Shane were always so much fun and filled with adventure. To her, Shane was always her hero and always will be. Now, as much as Shane looked back fondly on his school experience, he remembers he couldn't wait for the day to get out. And on the last day of Easter term in his 16th year, he packed his bags and simply walked out, never to return. He then went on to live with his maternal grandparents in Scarborough, as his mum had moved to Germany, where her husband at the time was stationed with the Royal Military Police. Shane's grandfather encouraged him to go to Wetwang and find his father. They were reunited, and the Culley family who had not seen for many, many years. He was given directions and boarded the bus in Whitfield for Wetwang. He apparently recognised his Aunt Judy on the bus by her toes. And she directed him to his dad and grandparents' home when he got there. He knocked on the door, and his granddad answered and told him, "You don't have to knock, son, you're family." For a short time, Shane joined the Redcaps, the Royal Military Police, and would often tell the story of meeting Her Majesty the Queen in March 1978, and much to his embarrassment, lying to the Queen, I might add, twice. Having practiced for a demonstration of unarmed combat, the time approached for Her Majesty to arrive. Without warning, his opponent disappeared, and an Adonis-styled SAS lookalike took his place. Telling Shane to do exactly as he'd practiced, the next thing Shane remembered was being flat on his back on the gym mat, which he had been placed between them. Quickly standing to the attention of the Queen, she asked, "Are you all right?" "Yes, Your Majesty," came the reply. "And if he came at you the way he had just come at you, would you be able to do what he did to you?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The higher-ranking officials behind Her Majesty were fervently like that to Shane. He was given the rest of the day off to sort out his dislocated shoulder. Now, spending less than 12 months in the RMP, he joined his mother and stepfather out in Germany, where he ran the NAFI, and told of tales of meeting Chubby Brown, hosting the Drifters in his flat, and crossing Checkpoint Charlie to spend the money he had earned selling bacon to the Russian soldiers on duty. At the tender age of 20, he and a friend John decided to take the trip of a lifetime to America. And having travelled from Boston to Los Angeles and then San Francisco, they had just enough cash to get home back to Berlin or to go on to Sydney, Australia. Where do you think they chose? Australia, obviously. Shane's relatives in Adelaide put them up in their back garden until they had earned enough money to take the 3-day bus journey back to John's brothers in Perth, who paid for flights back to Berlin for them. We're now going to have another piece of music, ladies and gentlemen, to help us reflect on his early life. A piece that Shane would certainly have enjoyed listening to many, many times, being a real Madness fan.
Boys in nasty schools, headmasters breaking all the rules, having fun and playing fools, smashing up the woodwork tools. All the teachers in the pub, passing round a ready rub, trying not to think of when the lunchtime bell will ring again. Oh, what fun we had, but did it really turn out bad? All I learnt at school was how to bend, not break the rule. Oh, what fun we had, but at the time it seemed so bad, trying different ways to make a difference too. The headmasters had enough today, all the kids have gone away, gone to fight with next to school. Every turn that is the rule, sits alone and bends his cane, same old backsides again. All the small ones tell two tales, walking home and squashing with a plastic cup. Oh, what fun we had, but did it really turn out bad? All I learned at school was how to bend not break the rule. Oh, what fun we had, but at that time it seemed so bad, trying different ways to make the difference through the days.
So he soon returned to the UK and lived with his Auntie Judy up in Wetwang, doing various local jobs in the area and many, many farms. Now these were pre-health and safety days, which was just as well, as he used to travel between those farms, sat atop huge bales of hay on trailers attached to tractors, hanging on only by the wire that twined them. It was after this time that he met his first wife, Jackie. Whilst he was working as a security guard in Butlins in Filey in 1982. She was in fact a Dorset girl who was also working there and ended up staying between seasons as it was far too far to travel home. By 1984, now married and living in Scarborough, Shane decided he wanted to join the police force. After applying to several constabularies and receiving many no's in reply, on New Year's Eve he received a call from Cleveland, who said they were going to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, he'd only failed his exam by a couple of marks. However, they had to put a hold on recruitment at the time, and he didn't actually start until the 13th of April 1987. Now this meant a move to Middlesbrough, and it was here their children were born. Joe coming along in 88, Ben in 90, and Louisa in 1994. Shane loved his children and loved nothing better than getting them out in the garden and showing them how to grow their own veg. They had many fun family holidays together, including stays out in Florida, which included motel stops along its coast, as he loved nothing better than being by the beach. They had many camping holidays in Norfolk, the Isle of Wight, Scotland and France. They also went out to see their nan, Shane's mum, at her home in Spain many, many times. Now throughout his life, Shane was heavily involved in fundraising, as I've already mentioned, for numerous charities. Jackie and he were trustees together at one point of a charity set up by Jackie for a children's resource centre. And I'm sure we'll hear more today of the efforts he put in to getting fundraising prizes for different good causes. As I've already mentioned here today, there is an opportunity to raise money for some of the charities that are very dear to him. And again, I'll point out at the back of the room, there will be an opportunity to do that. He combined his passion with fundraising and golf many times, playing alongside his dad and his uncles Pete and Dick. He also joined his mates Alan Walls and Mark Braithwaite on many a golfing holiday. I would now like to invite Shane's golfing buddy and colleague from Cleveland Police, Mark Braithwaite, to come up and share some of his memories of him with us. I am assured they are all legal and above board. However, if you'd like to hear any of those that he couldn't share in public, I'm sure you could nab him later. Mark.
Madness, baggy trousers, 1980. It never did make number one. It got to number 3, and it was all about happy days at school. If you listen carefully to the lyrics, I'll come back to that in just a moment. On a day that many of us suspected was likely as not inevitable at some stage, given the aggressive nature of Shane's illness, it's my privilege to have been asked to say a few words about him and about his career with Cleveland Police. I most recently visited him when he was being cared for at the Marie Curie Hospice here in Liverpool, and he invited me to speak at this celebration of his life. And of course, I accepted his invitation. I asked him, is there anything specific that you've thought about that you'd like me to say or not say? And in spite of his deteriorating situation, but with his sense of humour undiminished, he said, it's up to you, Braith. Try to be a bit upbeat though, and make me sound as good as you can. Whilst I was a serving officer, I was Shane's departmental commander at Cleveland for a number of years, and I'm really pleased that many of his friends and colleagues from the North East have come across today to give some support to Lesley and Shane's families and to pay their respects. Like me, Shane was of the baby boomer generation. He was born, as Kevin said, in January 1960. Unlike me, and unlike Suggs and Chas Smash, who wrote the Baggy Trousers song that you've just listened to, and that talks about our childhood days in a comprehensive school, Kevin's already alluded to the fact that Shane had a private boarding school education. I didn't know that until a few months ago when I visited him and Lesley at the house. And I believe the picture's here, but Kevin's mentioned it. There is a picture that they've had enlarged in the living room. It's a picture of about, I don't know, 10, 12 young lads, 8, 9 years old, freezing the nudges off on the school playing field in the middle of winter, playing football. And Shane used to have a bit of fun trying to guess which one was him. I didn't first time round, and I don't know whether anybody that's here that's seen it guessed that it was him first time round. He was very good looking in those days. But he was very proud of his schooling roots. You would not think he'd had such a privileged start to his formative education, mind, if you checked his police personal file and looked at the answers he gave to the general knowledge and spelling tests he had to do when he joined Cleveland Police. Lots of his general knowledge answers were wrong, and his spelling and his handwriting was terrible. But thankfully, the entry criteria then was not as exacting as it is now, and he was accepted. As a youngster, Shane always had an eye on a uniformed service career. And perhaps not many of you would know this, but you might have just picked it up from Kevin a moment ago, but his first uniformed role was as a redcoat at Butlins holiday camp in Filey. Now, that's how desperate Shane was to have a career in a uniform. He did get some early investigative experience from that role, I hasten to add, because he was no ordinary redcoat. Oh no, he was a security redcoat at Filey. But as he matured, his resolve for a service career strengthened. He joined the Red Caps, the Royal Military Police, as you've heard, before applying to join Cleveland Police 10 years later. And he trained, as some others in this room did, at Newby Whisky, North Yorkshire, and served his early service at South Bank on the outskirts of Middlesbrough, before he transferred to the CID, the Criminal Investigation Department, and remained at South Bank. Now, for those of you from this part of the world who think you've got some policing challenges here on Merseyside, visit South Bank on the outskirts of Middlesbrough one day. It's a revelation. Talk about life on Mars. In fact, later on today, when you get back to your home destination, if you go on your browser and Google Cleveland Police, North Yorkshire, amalgamation, Hitler, don't forget the Hitler bit, see what comes up. South Bank gets a particular mention. My hope is, when you Google it, it'll give you a smile. It certainly gave Shane a smile when he saw it. He enjoyed that video clip, and I know he very much enjoyed his policing time at South Bank, where he grounded himself as a detective for 4 years before he moved to the leafy suburbs of Gisborough on the North Yorkshire boundary, and then on to specialise in the area that really defined him as a detective, the fraud squad. Now, in the fraud squad, his principal mentor in all matters fraud and financial investigation was Raymond Savage. He's here today. The two of them, they were like the inseparables. They were joined at the hip, these two fellas. And they've remained close friends for many years. I think it was Raymond's extensive CID fieldcraft that was responsible for highlighting the various courses that Shane needed to attend to equip him for his role as a financial investigator. It's not clear, in fact I'm not sure that there was any senior management oversight of this process at all, as I've never seen anybody attend so many courses in so many places as Shane Culley did, ever. The National Fraud course in Manchester, the Technology and Economic Crime Investigation course in Birmingham in the West Midlands, the Metropolitan Police's Financial Investigation course in London. The list goes on, I won't bore you with it this afternoon. But note that none of these courses were local to Cleveland. Shane was the most qualified financial investigator that Cleveland Police had, probably in the country. His qualifications cost the taxpayer a bloody fortune in hotel and hospitality expenses, all of which seem to be geared to maximum enjoyment, maximum knowledge and professional accreditation. Shane went on to become somewhat the doyen of the fraud squad team in Cleveland, and he cherry-picked the investigations that he wanted to pursue, particularly those that involve famous footballers, big-name solicitors, company accountants. If it had a big name or some other newsworthy kudos attached to it, he was all over it like a rash. He was also one of our best travel detectives. He convinced me once that he needed to go to America, Philadelphia I think it was, in connection with, wait for it, the great cashew nut fraud investigation that he and his inspector were pursuing. If you didn't already know, cashew nut oil is used in the manufacture of brake drums for vehicles. Well, that's what Shane told me anyway. And he and Bill Matthews, his inspector, who's here, persuaded me that they needed to go out to America to gather the evidence that they needed to help prosecute this company fraud. A week they had out in America, on the back of the good old taxpayer, as you might expect. Bloody hard work, boss, said Shane when they got back. I'm not so sure. They didn't even bring me a proper souvenir back, which was the law at the time. They brought me back instead. They presented me with a little plastic Petri dish. You know those dishes that you had in biology and chemistry at school and you used to do things in it? One of those with a cashew nut in it and a tiniest vial of cashew nut oil alongside it. Talk about taking the piss out of the boss. This from the detective who went to arrest a local antique dealer for fraud and bought an antique lamp from him that went in the boot of the CID car before he locked him up. What a bloke. I think he also wrote his own press releases for the local papers on Teesside. His cases were hardly ever out of them and the reports were always gushing in their praise. DC Culley this, DC Culley that. They were good cases, mind, and one that he and Johnny Graham did before Shane came to this side of the Pennines was into our own Reggie Perrin, better known on Teesside as Canoeman John Darwin. You might have read about it in the paper some time ago. This is the guy who paddled out to sea in his canoe from Seaton Canoe, as it's now called, Seaton Carew near Hartlepool, and who tipped up years later, apparently suffering memory loss, having invested heavily in Panama in South America. It was a really interesting case, actually, and one that Shane and John did all the financial investigation work on and around. And one, as you might expect, that Shane milked the worldwide media coverage for. I'm only surprised he didn't inveigle a week's trip to Panama for him and Johnny out of it, actually. But in fairness, he could always be relied upon to do a first-class job. He was commended several times by judges in the Crown Court, by Her Majesty's coroners, and once, a little further down the pecking order, by me. Though that was nothing to do with his investigative prowess. It was in relation to his contribution to organising the then hugely successful Cleveland Police charity Pro-Am golf tournament, which Shane was involved with for about 6 years. Although the organisation of this tournament was a team effort, each of us on the organising committee had a specific role and function to perform. And Shane's role was particularly important. We relied completely on him as our number one schmoozer for our celebrities, to look after our celebrities. Kevin Keegan, Ian Botham, a cricketer, Jack Charlton, all familiar names from the world of sport. And as you might expect, every last one of them ending up as his best mate and on his Christmas card list. When it came to schmoozing celebs, let me tell you, he was a master of it. And over the years that we were involved in organising the tournament, it raised thousands of pounds for a variety of local charities in Middlesbrough. And on a more serious side, Kevin's mentioned it already, but Shane saw great value in supporting local charities. So it comes as no surprise to me to see that he and Lesley are looking for donations in his memory towards Marie Curie and the Brain Tumour charity. So please give generously when the time comes. Sticking with golf just for a moment, Shane used to play for many years in the Culley Cup event. Possibly not that well known on this side of the Pennines as a tournament, but this was a prestigious annual tournament that I think his dad Ken started off a lot of years ago with perhaps a couple of his uncles, of Shane's uncles, and they played at the course at Allerthorpe near Driffield. And you knew you'd made it if you got an invite to this tournament. I never did get an invite to this tournament, but Shane did accept my invite to him to come with a group of us on the Scottish Golf Tour, as we called it, for several years. He even wangled this place for his Uncle Rick one year when somebody had to pull out at the last minute. And in 2008, there was no prouder golfer than Shane when somehow, unbeknown to most of us on the tour, he actually won the coveted green jacket and got his name engraved on the trophy as the week's champion golfer. 2008 was a double celebration for Shane, because that was the same year that he was awarded his master's degree in fraud management. Another course I've no doubt he maxed up. No, seriously though, he did put a huge amount of effort into his studies, and his degree award was very well deserved. Shane came across to this part of the world 6 years ago now as part of the Hillsborough inquiry investigation team, a seminal case that's been in the news again recently. And it was supposed to be a 2-year secondment from Cleveland. But as he did throughout his police career, he applied himself well to the job that needed to be done. His efforts were welcomed by those on this side of the country, and his initial 2-year secondment was extended until his retirement and beyond. And his move to this part of the world led to his meeting of marrying Lesley, to meeting a wider family who took Shane to their hearts, and the rest, as they say, is history. Thoughtful, caring, intelligent, honest, tenacious, discreet, hard-working, most of the time, a good servant to the people of Cleveland, and more recently to those in this part of the world. Just a few of the adjectives I would use to describe Shane. Certainly one of life's characters, a person of great warmth, humour and bonhomie. And on the latter front, he particularly enjoyed being a member at the Monday night club at the Pied Piper pub on Ormsby Bank in Middlesbrough. And it's great that a good few of that crowd have been able to get across today to pay their respects. I'm not sure what time lights go out in this place tonight, Kev, but I think someone had better let the hotel management know that the Monday night crowd are in the building. They're not noted as being adherents of the Temperance Society movement, let me tell you. Shane was a loving son, husband and father to Joe, Ben and Louisa, all of whom he was immensely proud of. He was a loyal friend to many, and someone who I think was fairly philosophical about life in general. I never heard him complain once about his illness. From my own observation, he faced it head on, stoically, bravely and with dignity. Again, perhaps that says much about the kind of person that he was. I once heard it said of man that the idea is to die young as late as possible. Well, that sentiment certainly doesn't apply in this case. Too young, too soon, I suspect is the overwhelming thought in many of our minds today. but it's testament to the impact that Shane had on the many people with whom he came into contact and the affection in which he was held by so many, that so many people are here today to support his family, to pay the respects and to celebrate his life. Shane asked me to make him sound good if I could. I didn't need to really. The fact is he was good on any number of fronts, both personal and professional, and we'll miss it.
The following music is off a Robbie Williams album, which Shane particularly enjoyed listening to, and he thought quite fitting to follow Mark's summary of his career in law enforcement.
Buzzer took a monkey for a ride in the air. The monkey thought that everything was on the square. The buzzer tried to throw the monkey off of his back. The monkey grabbed his neck and said, "Now listen, Jack. Straighten up and fly right. Straighten up and stay right. Straighten up and fly right. Cool down, Papa, don't you blow your top. Ain't no use in diving. What's the use in jiving? Straighten up and fly right. Cool down, Papa, don't you blow your top." The buzzer told the monkey, "You are choking me. Release your hold and I will set you free." The monkey looked the buzzard right dead in the eye and said, "Your story's so touching, but it sounds just like a lie. Straighten up and fly right. Straighten up and stay right. Straighten up and fly right. Cool down, Papa, don't you blow your top." Take it away, boy. Straighten up and fly right. Straighten up and stay right. Straighten up and fly right. Cool down, Papa, don't you blow your top. Ain't no use in diving. Ain't no good in jiving. Straighten up and fly right. Cool down, Papa, don't you blow your top. Fly right.
Shane and Jackie eventually divorced, and having found friendship and love when he met Les as he attended a police training course here in Liverpool, he took the opportunity, as we've already heard, to take a secondment to the Hillsborough inquiry to be with her. We're now going to have a tribute from Gerry Donnellan from Operation Resolve, something Shane was extremely proud to be a part of. Gerry.
Good afternoon, everybody. You've heard some kind words from Mark, and just to emphasise how genuine Shane was, I'm going to reiterate a lot of those words. Shane worked with Operation Resolve for just over 5 years. I first met him in early 2013 when he travelled over from Cleveland to the Operation Resolve premises in Greater Manchester. Shane was researching, smoozing really, the possibility of working on the Hillsborough inquiry as a seconded police officer. He did big up all his qualifications, I can tell you. He explained that he was an accredited financial investigator who had travelled the country and blagged you many times. He held a fraud-based master's degree, and he bigged that up too. Would welcome the opportunity to work on an inquiry until his retirement, as he planned it in January 2015. I remember quite vividly Shane desperately trying to convince me that the inquiry needed one of him, a fraud investigator. If I'm honest, I wasn't totally convinced. Not that it wasn't Shane, but a fraud investigator. My body language must have given something away, because he carried on and he was, despite his public school upbringing and things like that, he was very persuasive. He might not be able to read and write, but he could talk a lot. He rounded it off, the sort of half an hour, 1 hour chat we were having, by saying that his future was in the northwest. And we both agreed that the northwest was definitely going to trump Cleveland. Despite his heavy fraud background, he was interviewed in the July 13 and started with us the following month. And he went on to retire from Cleveland Police as he had planned, but stayed on working with us until taking ill last year. When Shane joined us, he knew nobody, and nobody knew Shane. In fact, very few people knew anybody. As the team formed and grew, it was made up from people from all over the country. Shane was one of the early ones to join us. Someone that was going to go on and set the standards and the benchmarks for others to follow. Things that they had to attain and aspire to, and he did that really well. Shane fitted in right from the off, right from the day one, but I'll come back to that very shortly. The high level of esteem that he was held in meant, sadly for Shane, that he often got what people would describe as the dull, tedious, boring jobs. Those jobs, however, were actually the really important jobs for the investigation. He always did as he was asked. He never moaned. He never questioned why. He always delivered. Always to a high standard, without fail, picking out nuggets of information as he quietly went about in an unassuming manner. In the years he was part of the inquiry, he held various investigative roles. He worked on audiovisual material, all the AV and CCTV. He was central to the witness appeals, and he listened to hundreds of hours of control room communications tapes for over a year. And to round off his time with us, quite nicely, I thought, he worked on disclosure. He must have thought, what have I done wrong to deserve all that? He was selected for his roles for his attention to detail, his immense competence, his understanding of what the investigation was looking for, and the evidence it actually needed. There was an occasion when I walked into the office where Shane was working. He was listening to the control room communications tapes, and he had some huge, oversized headphones on that covered his ears. And I walked over to him and slapped him on the back to say thank you for all his efforts. It took him by surprise. He jumped out of his skin and ruined his clothing. His work was double-checked that day. Recently, while Shane was having his treatment, some of the team would pop over to Liverpool to see him. He was always ready to go for a coffee. A short journey in the car. It's just round the corner, he would often say. I'll give you directions. Please don't worry. So we didn't. So as we jumped in the car and we set off, we came to the first junction, and he would say, right here, and point left. So we went straight on, eventually getting there with a little bit of assistance from Lesley. We love listening to his tales about going shopping on his own and buying small, little, round, green things. Peas, you were all immediately thinking. Tangerines is what he was talking about. Drinking Guinness Light. That's full-strength Guinness, he was trying to convince us, made his legs buckle. And how he was going to visit one of the two Scottish cities. waiting for us to work out that it was actually Glasgow. We recall his positivity, his smile, and the big hugs you got when you left. You always felt his warmth and humility. I said I'd come back to Shane fitting in on inquiry, and I will do now. Shane had a natural ability to communicate with everyone, to put people at ease and to empathise with them if required. He could talk, absolutely he could talk, dropping into conversations the odd celeb. There was a Stuart here, there was an odd Gareth there, Stuart Downing and Gareth Southgate. He would tell you that he's been texting Gareth all the way through the World Cup, and you didn't believe him, so he did, and he texted his comeback. Shane was liked and respected by everyone, and as you can see from here today, from all his colleagues that have made the journeys from near and far, I never heard him have a bad word to say about anybody. He was a professional, a gentleman, someone who was a pleasure to work with and work for. When he was interviewed in 2013, the interviewers wrote, he would be an asset to the investigation, he's reliable and would conduct thorough investigations. How insightful that little comment was, because that's what he did. Going back to my very first meeting with Shane, he was right. I did need one of him. That was for his knowledge of company law and financial investigations, as his fraud experience and all those courses, Mark, turn out to be invaluable to us. In the last few months, we've found more out about Shane. His inner strength, his enjoyment of life, and a word that's already been used, his stoic approach to even the most devastating news was really quite remarkable. He loved people, humour, and appreciated what others did for him. These qualities meant he was a much-loved friend and colleague who will be sadly missed by us all. Thank you.
Whilst the following piece of music, and we're having lots of music today because Shane loved music, is from Carousel. And the song plays a big part in the lives of the fans of the Liverpool football team. Shane was actually keen for you to all to hear this version.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky, and the sweet silver song of the lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown, tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of a storm is a golden sky, and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown, tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never
now like to invite his daughter, Louisa, to come up and share on behalf of her and her brothers their memories of their dad.
It is an impossible task to summarise 30 years of memories for these purposes in any kind of fair way. Our memories of Dad can and won't occur in the form of short, amusing childhood anecdotes, but from our lives spent with him, all the days and all the minutes. During whatever moments in the years ahead that we fall into reflection of his life, during whatever moments in the years ahead that we fall into reflections of his life, they'll be on the person that he was more than the things that he did. The person that he was difficult to fully express, but we wish to give a snapshot of some recollections that have come to our minds that might allow our understanding of his loving fatherhood. He was a family man, first and always. His love was not for just us as his children, for his parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles and in-laws. He was strongly protective of and loved in return by his sister and nieces. He was an uncle too to his nephews and nieces and our mother's side of the family. And in what tragically proved to be the later years of his life, he embraced Lesley's children, Jen and Dan, and Liz's own extended family in an identical way. It is not surprising that so much of our childhood seems to have been trips out in his car, whether to visit family in Wetwang, usually having selected the quietest village on the way down to wind down the windows of his Sierra and turn up his Dire Straits cassette. On picnic trips to Hutley Hall or family get-togethers in Scarborough at Christmas time. He would also be in the car through the week, taking me to dancing, Ben to judo and rugby, and Joe to his piano lessons. These were not hardships for him. Joe's piano teacher always looked forward to hearing gossip about his work, and he was always more than happy to oblige. Dad would pack the people carrier with the tent and gazebo to travel across the country with friends for Ben's judo competitions. He also went with Ben on an interesting and eventful under-14s rugby tour to France. Naturally, he was asked to take on the role as prosecutor during the kangaroo court for misdemeanours and forfeits on the ferry ride home. This did mean having to prosecute Ben for a GBH, having been accused of flattening one of the coaches while running with the ball. Dad made no secret how chuffed he was at Ben for having done so, but to Ben's misfortune, his defence counsel was the very same coach he assaulted, who entered an immediate guilty plea on his behalf. He travelled to many of my performances and shows, most recently just before Christmas. I was always aware of his visible pride, though he was a man easily brought to tears in an audience. There were, of course, other adventures too. He always had a fond memory of taking Joe and Ben to Cardiff to watch Middlesbrough win the Carling Cup in 2004. Typically, as with all of Dad's plans, the night before was spent not in a hotel, but in the guest room of Cardiff Old Folks Home, booked under the name of a friend of a resident who we had to pretend to be visiting. He did attempt to encourage me to the football too, but with not quite the same success. He was always prepared to ensure we had holidays away. Even in the early years, he had to make sacrifices in his own luxury. So this too meant him filling the car and taking it to the road for hundreds of miles at a time, and was the case whether to our grandmothers on the south coast, or then on very happy camping trips to the Isle of Wight, Norfolk, Scotland, Cornwall, and later France. He enjoyed teaching us to catch crabs from the harbour at Muddyford, then emptying the bucket down the ramp to watch them race back into the sea. On the pier at Great Yarmouth, he gave Barry Chuckle, of the Chuckle Brothers, a very stern look to indicate he would prefer not to be hit in the face with a custard pie. It didn't work. Nor did it work when he attempted to eat the shaving foam, having for some reason presumed the pie would have contained actual custard. Additionally, somewhere in the boot he'd bring with us his old family dinghy, which he prided on being a proper dinghy, unlike the cheap ones being sold on the beach. The time spent watching us jump out of it into the sea always did seem more fleeting than the time spent packing, unpacking, patching up and inflating it. Nonetheless, every year, there it was. Later, he loved to take Joe and then Ben out to the pub, and it was Dad who taught them how to enjoy a responsible beer or two. Some, often our mother, would say a little too young. but it was a valuable lesson. Again, as he was fair to us all, this was something he attempted with me too. Again, with a little less success. Another valuable lesson passed on to us is that with the right amount of politeness and charm, not all the best things in life necessarily have to be paid for. Those who don't ask don't get, and Dad would always ask. The happy childhood he helped create for us meant we all enjoyed close relationships with him in adulthood as well. And the opportunity for happy memories continued, whether on a gardening trip to Ireland with Ben, accidentally discovering he and Lesley had booked a trip to Pisa for the same weekend as Joe, glossing over his aborted efforts to order food in Italian, or being moved to tears when I arranged a surprise visit to see him after a year in Australia. Everything was a new opportunity for Dad, and whenever he could, he would try and create opportunities for us. Even once, in the hospice, being taken by his physiotherapist in a wheelchair for some fresh air, when asked by her, "Is this your son coming to visit you then?" a reference to Joe, who was walking alongside, he naturally replied immediately by saying, "Yes, this is my son. He's a barrister, you know. Actually, he must be about the same age." Once alone, regardless of his huge coat, oxygen tube and limited mobility, he was still able to pass on a nod and a wink and respond, "Good looking woman there, Spud." Personally, I'll always remember his strong hugs. They were my favourite. Whether to say hello or goodbye, or just sat watching TV. Even sometimes to keep warm. Like on the well-advised open-top tour bus of Dublin one New Year's Day, when he had to borrow one of my less than masculine woolly hats, and he wore it without embarrassment. That brings us to today. We're not sure whether he had any strong views on whether there's an afterlife, but if he is now in another place, we all take comfort from the knowledge that his first protocol will have been to befriend the doorman of the VIP room. Goodbye, Dad. We know what you'd be telling us if you were here today, but it's okay. We know.
Nice to see the youngest, the bravest. Our next piece of music is one that Louisa alluded to. She would have heard many times with the window wound down as they travelled the length and breadth of wherever they were going to.
do it. Get your money for nothing, get your chicks for free. We got to install microwave oven, custom kitchen deliveries. We got to move these refrigerators. We got to move these color TVs. Listen here, now, that ain't working. That's the way you do it. You play the guitar on the MTV. That ain't working. That's the way you do it. Money for nothing and your chicks for free. Money for nothing.
I would now like to ask Les's good friend Billy to come up to share with us Les's tribute, something she's entitled My Gorgeous Man.
Hi everyone. I hope I do justice to Lesley's words. Shane, strolling in the sunshine. Is that right, Kev? Rambling in the rain, fields of buttercups, hillsides and waterfalls. The scenery was stunning, though the map reading skills less so. Even with printed instructions and pictures, we'd always take extra snacks and the hip flask to keep us going for the inevitable part of the walk where we'd be lost. Once we even had a complete stranger giving us a 10-minute ride back to our car when we were stranded on a dangerous A road and no clue how to get back. You tell me of the gloves you were made to wear during your police driving course with large letters left and right on them. Clearly he didn't learn much from that. So it must have been me making the wrong turns. So you knew, because you knew which was which. You were no good with heights though. I thought I'd have to phone Mountain Rescue on the old man of Coniston, as you were practically on your hands and knees crawling down, your face the colour of the scorched grass nearby. But we did get as far as low water, which was quite an achievement. Another time, we were halfway round a 10-mile circular walk, then had to cross an aqueduct at 126 feet. You weren't keen, but it was too far to go back. You held onto the handrail with white knuckles, plain to see, looked straight ahead, properly, and walked without stopping. For anyone or anything, the elderly, babies in pushchairs, dogs on leads, they had to move out of your way. You weren't giving up the safety of the handrail for man nor beast. I remember watching the Proclaimers sing in 500 Miles at Liverpool Music Festival, and we well walked those 500 miles together and 500 more. You loved a sunny beach, topping up your year-round tan, and swimming in the sea. A favourite thing about visiting your mum would always be the days we'd spend on the beach walking along the safety of the water's edge before you'd finally persuade me that the sea wasn't so cold once you got in, and we'd let the gentle waves drift us out and back to shore. This was a truly relaxing place for you. And whilst the setting wasn't always quite the same, you would reminisce about the sand in the sandwiches you ate as a child during village trips to the coast and crabbing at Bridlington Pier with your Uncle Andrew. We both liked to cook, but seldom together. The kitchen wasn't big enough. It is, I tell you, for both of us with our ideas of how things should be done. But your scrambled eggs were always perfect, and cooking steak and fish your speciality. You happily embraced all my old family favourites, making the effort all worthwhile. A meal together was always a celebration, whether it was recounting the day, discussing family and friends, planning how to spend the next weekend, or thinking about our next breakaway. Those conversations were always best over a good food and a glass of wine. A meal with friends was never a dull moment, and you would tell stories of your childhood, years in Berlin and police exploits. You thrived on company and conversation, and this would continue right through your illness, as friends and family visited or rang to tell you their news. It was nice to eat out together or with friends, but more special when we dressed up for our own dinner parties, followed by dancing in front of the fire. Now that probably conjures up a romantic picture. But even after watching as much Strictly as we did, we were pretty useless at the dancing bit and would end up falling about laughing. Or maybe it was just the wine. I did get you a drinks monitor badge at one point, but it wasn't necessarily as successful as the name might have suggested. I'm not sure I understood the rules. You joined me during Lent when we'd observe a no alcohol rule mostly, just to prove we weren't alcohol dependent. Some years were more successful than others, and people couldn't believe I even got you to attempt it. But I know you always wanted to support me in whatever I was doing, and this was the ultimate challenge. You were pleased to introduce me to the police family, which you were very proud to belong to. The bonds with friends there plain to see. We joined them for many celebrations, and though you moved away from Middlesbrough, it was always good to travel back for special occasions and to make sure you all stayed in touch. During your illness, I had the opportunity to meet some colleagues from very early on in your career. You loved the opportunity to reminisce with them about the good old days when policing was more like life on Mars. It meant a lot to you that they and other friends gave up their time to travel across the country to visit you. I thought it was testament to the high regard that they held you in and the value they placed on your friendship. Support for you continued with the Operation Resolve team, and you would ask who we had heard from on a particular day, and I would reply to WhatsApp clips sent through and read messages received, of which there were many. Again, there would be frequent visitors to keep you up to date with developments, and those were always welcomed. Business at the local golf club, restaurant and the Starbucks must have been booming. In turn, I introduced you to my barbershop family, a hobby I've enjoyed for nearly as long as you were a police officer. You embraced this wholeheartedly and soon became part of the groupies, giving me your undivided support as I directed Mersey Harmony and sang with Cheshire Chord Company. You had a beautiful tone to your singing voice and loved the time you spent with Cotton Town Chorus in Bolton. You were thrilled to be asked to stand side of the stage as the props man during their performance at the MGM Grand Arena in Las Vegas, and their championship year to accompany them, the chairman, round the choruses in warm-up rooms prior to the presentations of the annual convention competition, presenting mementos. Our mixed group, Harmonix, gave the opportunity to combine singing with socialising, a mix made in heaven, and even though you were a relative novice to the craft, you would make a point of speaking to people there for the first time when all encouraging words are welcomed. You loved spending time keeping the garden looking neat, mowing the grass in straight lines, keeping the shed tidy and spider-free, and growing tomatoes in the greenhouse. When ours was done, you'd phone Mo and Stan and do their grass too, a small ongoing token of thanks for the wonderful celebration they hosted in their garden for our wedding day. During the summer, you'd very often be sitting, beer in hand, admiring your efforts. When I got home from work, and I'd join you in the sun till the big chill of the night took us inside. One of the biggest credits you should take is for the encouragement, confidence, and support you gave me in my journey into my past. I'm sure many of you here will be familiar with the story, which Shane was keen to tell everyone at any opportunity, and whether you wanted to listen or not. Today and every day I am supported by a loving and caring family who all adored Shane, and without whom we may never have met. It means a lot to me, I would to him, that so many of you are here today. The happy memories I have are far too many to recount here, but I valued every day we had together and value them even greater now. Though my heart may be heavy today, You leave it a lighter, brighter place for having been in my life. I feel blessed for having been the focus of your adoration and love, and you will live in my heart forever. Lesley.
Just bear with me a second. I would now like to invite the Cheshire Chord Company or their representatives to come and sing another of Shane's favourites for us, ladies.
God.
to invite Shane's auntie-mum, Judy, up, and Les's son, Dan, to come up. And they're going to share a quick tribute with us.
Hi, I'm Judy. The first time I remember meeting my nephew, I was in the bus coming home from work when this handsome young man leaned over my seat, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Do you know me?" I said that I thought he looked familiar, but I couldn't think where I recognised him from. I had a few wild guesses, but he put me out of my misery, saying, "You are my Auntie Judy." "And I am Shane." Well, I was so pleased to meet him. I'd only seen pictures of him on his grandmother's sideboard, so it was lovely to meet him in person. I then pointed out his grandparents' home and went inside mine. I was about 26 or 27 then, and I told his Uncle Pete what had happened. So we went down to get him and took him to see his dad, who was in the local pub, my parents' pub. Later that week, there was a knock on our door. It was Shane. He asked me if he could come and live with us. It made me so happy to have him. He let me be his auntie-mum, and he adored his Uncle Pete. We enjoyed having him living with us. He worked hard and he loved us. He was one of the nicest young men I knew. Funny, loving and honest. They say that they take the best first. How right they are. It is a cruel world for us left behind, but he lived his life well, and I'm very, very proud to have been his auntie-mum and all that he achieved in his short but meaningful life. Yes, very, very proud. I love you, Shane.
Hello. I have got some kind words to say on here, but Kev, can you just confirm his favourite team is Man United? Oh no, I might change this then. Well, no. Shane would be pleased, I think, with all of this, and for us to be able to share stories with smiles on our faces. And I think you might think there's a little bit of irony here with a Scouser in a suit in a room full of policemen. And it's not stand up, you know. But that brings me to my first memory of Shane. I met him in Mather Avenue Police Club, so I was already suspicious. But no, it was where my mum used to sing and I used to be distracted while they were practicing. I've heard in numerous talks today about his intuition and his problem solving. I used to spend the time doing crosswords and puzzles, and I promise you that that's not the case. But no, there are many things that I remember about him. There's the provocative political arguments we'd have in the kitchen. The stories of Berlin, his time in the police, and when him and my mum used to get lost. The quiet pints when I needed some advice. And he taught me how to meet celebrities as well. Taking me to VIP to Liverpool, so I met Suarez, which is, you know, it's good for me. He played for Liverpool, by the way, it wasn't like just a random person. However, for me, it's not just these individual moments that will stand out. With the feeling of respect I have for him, the enthusiasm I saw when he'd tell a story or tell a joke, the genuine satisfaction he took from doing small things for you. But the thing I'll remember about him most is something I have to thank him for. The happiness he brought to my mum's life. For every smile I remember her, on her face. I remember him sitting there next to her too. He took away any moments of worry for her, and I felt her confidence grow. I thank him because our lives were enriched because of him. I knew I didn't have to worry because he worried for my mum. I knew his hair problems were his problems. So for that reason, I'll just leave it there and thank him.
We're almost at the time where we're going to get ready to say our goodbyes to Shane. And he hasn't, apart from the words that he gave me, had the opportunity to say anything back to you. And I think I would like to say these words back to you on his behalf. They are goodbye. Goodbye, dear ones. And if ever you need a friend, how happy I will be should you get tired on life's rough way. Just say my name. Come and lean on me. Could I ask you now, please, ladies and gentlemen, to join me in the words of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. We're now going to have one final musical tribute from Cheshire Chords and his beloved Harmonix, the Irish Blessing.
And when at last me time is spent, and I have packed me earthly tent, to heaven I shall tack me wing, and listen to the angels sing, like thrushes did at Wetwang.
As we leave the ceremony, ladies and gentlemen, it is important to remember that for those closest to Shane, it may well feel as though all the clocks have stopped, the dogs have stopped barking, and the world no longer evolves. So whilst we rush and busy ourselves in our daily routines, let us not forget Shane. And as we bump into the family on the street, in the shops, or even if we call round, let them know that we have not forgotten Shane, and that they are safe and free to talk to us about him and to let us know how they're doing. Just time now for our final piece of music, whilst those of us going to the crematorium make our way there. Gentlemen. Gentlemen. Please be seated. If you just like to remain in your seats for a moment, there's a small slideshow that will be showing some images and memories of Shane. And then once we've returned from the crematorium, we will be joining you for refreshments. Once the slideshow has ended, the staff at the hotel have asked if you could make your way back out to the bars so that they could come in here and make some space for those refreshments. Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Blue Skies up there waiting, and today is the day we've waited for. Oh, Mr. Blue Sky, please tell us why you had to hide away for so long. Where did we go wrong? Hey there, Mr. Blue, it's a place to be with you. Look around, see what you do. Everybody smiles at you. Hey there, Mr. Blue, it's a place to be with you. Look around, see what you do. Everybody smiles at you.
Never thought I'd miss you half as much as I do. And I never thought I'd feel this way, the way I feel about you. As soon as I wake up every night, every day, I know that it's you I need to take the blue.